Finding a voice, how I did it. This part about leafing through the brochure for the introductions reminds me of our readings in the church when we have to say the first reading, second reading, and we have to leaf through the Bible to find which passage from the Testament to read. So I have to quickly do that. But we've got a nice, very interesting lineup of guests today. Kornelia couldn't make it, so Kornelia is well known for her books on cuisine. She is based in Goa. We have with us Manasi Sapre, Pooja Nansi in coalition with young Trusha Ganesh. So let me introduce to you Manasi first. She has worked in television as head of content and programming for various television, national and international TV channels and digital platforms as well. Currently, she works with UK-based telecommunication company Lebara Digital Media as head of content for the Indian subcontinent. For the video on demand platform Lebara Play, available in Europe, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and soon in the USA. She is also the author of the Pune Murder Chronicles, which was a bestseller at Crossword for the Crossword, and she's also going to tell us about how she finds a voice and expresses it. We have Pooja Nansi. Nansi, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Pooja Nansi. She's a poet and performs poetry as well, the spoken word. She has two collections to her credit, Stiletto Scars and Love is an Empty Bar Stool. She is the co-editor of an anthology of Singaporean poetry, which includes and she curates a monthly event with actually I'm making a mistake. Y'all should be up here, please. Trusha as well. So that they can see your faces and connect to what I'm saying. Yes. So Pooja, she curates this monthly event called Speakeasy, and she also runs the Singapore chapter of Burn After Reading. It's a collective of young emerging poets. Trusha is our youngest panelist, and we will be seeing a lot of her in the future. She's an avid blogger. She loves writing on anything and everything. That's how we all start out with. And she's one in 50,000. We say one in a million, but she's one in 50,000 specifically because in 2013 she won this Max Life Insurance iGenius Young Authors Hunt, and she won the grand first prize out of 50,000 entries. And the story was one of the 50 short stories. The story was one of 50 short stories which were edited and selected by Chetan Bhagat and Ruskin Bond. Yes, because she is the youngest of us to tell us. And so she will be actually in conversation with our two guests. Over to you. Finding your voice.
First of all, thank you so much for that generous introduction. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us here at the Goa Arts and Literature Festival for our session on Finding Your Voice. Before I begin, I would like to say that I'm really sorry, but I'm going to be referring to these notes a lot. I've been kind of busy today. I've just come from another event, so please forgive me in advance. So on with the session. My name is Trusha Ganesh. I'm a 14-year-old class 9 student, and today I'm in conversation with Pooja Nansi and Manasi Sapre. Let's get over with the boring bit first, and that's me telling you a little bit about myself. My journey to becoming an author began 5 years ago when my parents set up my first blog for me when I was 9 years old. It was called Chikutam, and on it I posted random literary odds and ends and little things I would come up with throughout the day. Over the course of the next 5 years, I set up 3 more specific blogs. These provided me with the perfect forum to connect and interact with bloggers all over the globe, and so far it's been a brilliant experience. However, my first big break came along in 2013 when I was selected from over 50,000 as a grand first prize winner at the iGenius Young Authors Hunt which was judged by Ruskin Bond and Chetan Bhagat, two of my favorite authors. Winning the competition meant that my story would be published in a book called The iGenius Twist in the Tale, making me the youngest published author in Goa at age 11. Seeing my name in print gave me an unparalleled rush, and I was hooked. I wanted more, and so I started sending my articles to various publications, which has resulted in my works being published in leading newspapers and dailies on a fairly regular basis. Apart from literature, I have several other hobbies, including but not limited to karate, at which I am a black belt, long distance running, swimming, triathlons, playing the piano. I'm sure I've bored you enough with my ramblings, so let's move on to our talented panelists. Could you guys tell me a little bit more about yourself, as I'm sure our audience is eagerly waiting to know more?
I'm sure it's going to fail in front of the introduction we've just heard. I am getting palpitations myself. But anyway, to talk a little about myself, I work in media, and so currently I work as head of content for Indian subcontinent for a VOD platform which is based in Europe and Australia, New Zealand and Canada. So that's the profession, and I've worked in television before. So basically, just to, tell you a little bit about. So I studied in Pune in Ferguson College, and it sort of seemed like like the perfect paradise that only when you're in college you feel like that. And now I go back to Pune quite often. I've traveled quite a bit, and there are a couple of things which always strike me is that the way these tier 2 metros, as we call it, change. How cities like Lucknow, Bhopal, Pune, Bangalore, Hyderabad, they all have certain things in common, and that's the way they are changing. And it's very different from, let's say, a Bombay or a Chennai or a Kolkata. So that is something which I'm always interested in. Second thing which sort of you can say is something which has interested me practically all my life is crimes or issues against women, like whereby suddenly it's sort of become very fashionable, and it's a great thing that crimes against women have become mainstream now. Suddenly you hear words like feminism in national debate, which people would have laughed at it a few years ago. But it also reflects the way our society is changing, because crime is something which sort of is a mirror to society, and so crime fiction has been my passion, and I studied in some elite universities where I had to hide it because it would be considered as very lowbrow thing to do. But then I would say, like, Shakespeare was a crime writer. All his plays have been about the crime. Dostoevsky is a crime writer, so I would defend myself like that. But I do believe that there is all this genre. Okay, this is crime, this is chick lit, this is what fantasy, this is for young adults and all. It sounds very good on on publishing those blurbs. But at the end of it, people want to read good stories, and people want to read meaningful stories. I think that being meaningful in whichever way you can. You cannot be meaningful in everything. Some people can, not many can. But I believe that I have tried to sort of bring together my interests, my concerns about the society I live in through my book.
That was absolutely inspiring. Pooja?
Yeah, so I was just going to say it's really scary being here with an overachiever like
Yeah,
you,
exactly.
but I don't. Yeah, but palpitations, right? Yeah. And she was like trekking, running, swimming, and the list just didn't end. And then piano. So she's also all-rounded. So I'm a poet. I'm based in Singapore. My parents were born and brought up in India, and I went to Singapore when I was a year old, and then grew up there. So but I used to come back to India every year to visit my grandparents. So I tread between two homes in a sense. Because poetry makes no money, I had to find a day job. But then I knew as a 3-year-old that I wanted to be a teacher. So I used to line up all my dolls, teach them. So I did. I used to conduct classroom sessions. So I became a teacher, and I was teaching for 10 years. And I was head of department for English literature in a junior college in Singapore, which is 11th and 12th standard. And then I've decided to take a break from teaching, and I'm currently doing a residency in a university at Singapore. All that means is basically you teach one class and they pay you money to write. So it's a dream. It's a dream, but it's only going to last a year. And then I'm back to the real world. Yes, so for me, I love crime fiction, by the way. So I'm in awe of anyone who writes it. But poetry for me is my medium because I grew up in a household of music. So my dad, for as long as I can remember, would play old Hindi songs, and like music was always, he's always humming. And to me, poetry is a kind of music, and I came to it very young. And the first poem I ever wrote was about my maths teacher, because I was really bored in math class. I really didn't like math, so it was a really not a very nice poem about her. And then I realized, oh, this is fun. And so that's how I came to poetry. That's how I came to poetry, and I really think that writing, in a way, for me is how I coped, because I was a very emotional child. I still am a very emotional person. So I get very attached to things and places, and it was just a way for me to contain my emotions and put them somewhere. So that's how I came to writing, basically. Yeah.
That's absolutely amazing. And now that we're on the topic of overachieving, I'll be honest with you and say I was a bit of a late reader. Actually, a lot of a late reader. I remember that even as late as 2009, which is when we shifted from Bangalore to Goa, and I was in the 3rd grade, I still couldn't read even basic sentences. But after a few months of perseverance and a lot of hard work, I gradually became the maniacal reader that I am today. I'm certain that you guys have interesting stories about how you got introduced to literature, and maybe you could share those with us.
I think I don't even know where to begin. I grew up in a very literary sort of family. So my father's a critic, my mother loves to read, so that definitely influenced me. And I always found reading to have that kind of an escape, which is wonderful. I've been known to read the newspaper when you wrap the bhel puri. I do that even now, because it's just fascinating. I even read like those shampoo sachets. It's just something which I think reading is something which just it was there, and then gradually I guess you sort of develop a taste, and there's no good taste or bad taste. I don't think there is anything like that. I think gradually you sort of find out what fascinates you, and it changes also. I mean, something which fascinated you 5 years may not fascinate you right now, unless you are like in a publishing industry, or you're where you have to sort of, it's your profession, or somebody like you are more committed to literature than just an average sort of someone who writes one book or someone who reads. So I think that's sort of what fascinates me even today. You are a blogger. I think that is one more medium which is such a like a really great medium. I am absolutely fascinated by blogging. I have discovered so many things, and not just information, but a lot of through blogging. So I think it's changing a lot. The way things are being written, the written word is changing a lot, and I think it's a very good thing that there is a diversity now, and not like those hierarchies of what is good, this is bad, this is pulp, this is because you have written it on internet, it's not good, it's not literature. I don't think that's relevant anymore, which is a good thing.
Very similar. I think I owe all my reading habits to my mother. She used to read to me even when I was very little. So I was actually a very early reader. Like I started reading full sentences by the time I was 3. Yeah, and then so my mom would play this very annoying trick on me where she would read half the book, and then I'd be like, what now? What happened? And she's like, oh, you just have to learn how to read if you want to know. So that's how she tricked me into like becoming a faster reader. But similarly, I was a very awkward child. I didn't really like being in large crowds, so for me books were like a way, like they were always companions, and like even now, like I'll go to weddings and I carry a book in my bag because I'm like, I'm gonna get really bored. And then I do this thing sometimes where if it's a really boring function, I'll go to the toilet and just read a book because I'd rather be doing that. So for me, books are just companions and escapes, and you can always count on a book to be there for you in the way you can't necessarily count on people. Yeah.
Have you brought a book now?
Yeah, I have a book in my bag. It's Abir's book, actually. Yeah. I have opened it, yeah.
Kind of sounds like me grown up. So the thing about my literary journey is that I started fairly young-ish, even before my first blog.
She makes us feel like
I know.
dinosaurs already.
Even before my first blog, I was constantly scribbling away ideas and observations on little scraps of paper. And eventually, my parents realized how keen I was to jot everything down. And so, as I said before, they set up a WordPress account for me so that I could nurture this interest and maybe take it to the next level. So that's how my so far brief life as a writer officially began. Manasi and Pooja, being far more established and experienced authors, you probably have more specific and detailed reasons for why you began writing. I think you briefly touched upon that, but maybe you could stress a little more.
Okay, I think I sort of, I am a very imaginative, like, I kind of like to imagine, that's sort of in me. And gradually I wanted to write a book which I would like to read, like as a reader, the kind of books which I like to read. And as I said, there were a few influences. I always knew I'll write about, I'll write a crime fiction. I knew that it would be about women. I knew it would not be a crime fiction like a whodunit kind of a thing whereby people just solve murders one after another. But because the kind of books which I really enjoy, I think they're called sort of literary crime fiction. That's like a label which is given. But what they are about is they actually explore a lot of social issues, relationships, how people are changing, and the crime is used as a lens. Like my all-time favorite, who unfortunately passed away of cancer, is Henning Mankell, who's a Swedish writer. He's kind of a godfather of the Swedish, the whole Nordic, whose most famous thing is Girl with Dragon Tattoo, and that became an international phenomenon. But so Scandinavians have been doing it, Japanese have been doing it, Russians have been doing it. So I think that sort of, when you read a lot and you develop sort of a kind of affinity to that kind of, kind of books, and you want to write something, and you want to tell a story, and then you heard these anecdotes. Certain stories do impress you. So a couple of things which actually impressed me largely was a very good friend of mine. So we were chatting, and she said that there was a death in her family. And everyone knew that the husband killed the wife. He pushed her down the cellar. And it was long time ago. It was 30 years ago. And nobody said anything because at that time, pretty much the family wouldn't speak of such things because it was an upper middle class family and there were domestic violence, which I feel awkward sitting next to her and talking about these things actually. But so that struck me as it somehow was in my mind. And there's another friend of mine. So she heads HR, human resources for various companies, and she had told me a story about how actually a woman came back from maternity leave and she was denied a promotion because she came back from maternity leave. And this friend of mine, she objected to it because it's illegal. It's gender discrimination at its very at its obvious level. But things don't move. A lot of times you see that we think that gender discrimination is what happens in slums. That's what many people think, that it's not everyone's issue. But you would be shocked as how common it is, how India fares when it comes to very, very basic, what do you call them, markers of, be it maternal mortality, be it, malnourishment, be it primary education for women. So now those are the things which you read more about. They do disturb you, not only as a woman. You don't have to be a woman to get disturbed. So to come back to your original question, is that when you think of these things and when you have heard these few stories in your head, you do sort of feel like telling a story. and telling it in a way which sort of, you can put your thoughts into. So it's not a social commentary. That's a different, I believe there are several very capable essays and academic studies, but it's more like how do you tell it in a fictional way whereby, you still put your point across. Without it, I mean, at the end of it, it should be a good story. I mean, that's what again I believe. It sounds very unacademic and very old-fashioned, but it has to be, it should be a good story. And so I think that sort of prompted me to say, I want to write something. I want to write this, and those stories sort of came together to and then I did write about things which I knew about. I don't pretend to know things which I actually have no immediate connection with. I mean, it would be hypocritical to say that, I know about a certain world. I work in media. I know about media. I worked in a corporate takeover, so I know about that. I know about hypocrisies or about, personal relationships which occur in that context. So I guess that sort of, if it answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think, like, for me, writing is a very personal thing. I just do it because I need to. I know it sounds very selfish and very politically incorrect, but like people always ask, like, oh, do you write to change the world, or do you have social causes? And I really don't. And if my poetry for some reason touches someone or makes a difference, then for me that's a bonus. But really, for me, it's just a survival tactic because it's a way of keeping myself sane, right? It's making sense of my muddled insides on paper. And what it does for the reader, I never think about that when I write. I never think about who is going to read it or what people are going to get out of it. I just write because I need to, yeah. So for me, it's as simple as that.
So this is going to seem incredibly egoistic, but as I've explained before, I'm a girl of numerous interests. I love reading, as do most writers. I have participated in triathlons, I've tried my hand at baking, I'm an NCC cadet, and the list goes on. These experiences have all played a hand in shaping my writing. Another thing that I'm really passionate about is animals. We have 2 dogs, a lab and a beagle, who we rescued in Jan, and my sister and I have taken several neighborhood strays under our wing. This influences my work quite a bit, considering my entire blog dedicated to penning my lab's escapades, and the many animal-related posts I frequently slip in. I'm going to be so bold as to assume that there are a few events that have molded your writing as well. So could you perhaps mention a few standouts?
Again, as I said, I mean, there were these few stories which I had heard, and you read about such things like every day, but sometimes certain things do get stuck in your mind. So I would say, I mean, I am again, I mean, with this crimes against women is one thing, but I think also I've seen in my people I am surrounded with, like, from the blogs, from other this thing is that I think in modern times even the relationships, personal relationship doesn't only have to be like a romantic relationship, but what is friendship, and a lot of relationships are going through change, and it happens all the time. It doesn't happen right now and then it will get stable and it will forever continue like that. But for my generation, I'm interested in what's happening, with people of my generation who are at a cusp, of something. We have seen this whole globalization India and have grown with Doordarshan, which I mean, I'm sure you will have to go to some archives to find out. And now we obviously are, in a post-liberal kind of a world. So I would say that those experiences influence, your writing definitely. There's one thing which I believe binds all the writers, is that they sort of get something from some experience which a lot of times maybe they are unable to define, but still are maybe owe their inspiration.
For me, and this is going to sound a bit cliched, but it's really identity which has been a bit of a struggle, because someone was asking me about what the Indian community is like in Singapore. And recently, like, I've come to realize that Indianness is such a varied thing that it's really hard to answer that question. So for example, like, I'm married to a Tamil Singaporean. He's a 3rd or 4th generation Singaporean. So his mom was born in Singapore, his grandparents were born in Singapore. The food they eat at home is completely different from the food I grew up eating. And as a child of immigrants, like, the food I ate at home was completely different from the food I encountered in my school canteens. So my Indianness always, it has alienated me, but also made me feel like, oh, this particular voice for me didn't exist growing up in the Singaporean narrative. And like, there's several times you kind of go out there and you're made to realize just how unrepresented you are sometimes. And for me, there was a need to kind of insert that voice in and make people a little uncomfortable, which I delighted in because it's fun. So that was one thing. I also like I find myself always thinking about my grandparents and heritage and culture, and because I'm a child of immigrants, there are things I don't want to lose or things that I want to hold on to. So a lot of my work tries to hold on to that. And a lot of it is also the tension between the expectations of what it means to be an Indian woman, you know, because like, I love like Mohammed Rafi and I love like old music, but I also really love like gangster rap, you know, and like, I can make a really good roti, but I also really like drinking whiskey on the rocks. So people are really sort of like can't, and that kind of pigeonholing and that kind of tension is to me something that I like exploring, yeah.
You guys are proof that one can be inspired by not only other people but also oneself, so that's absolutely great. One thing about our esteemed panel, as the audience has probably noticed, is that they're from such different backgrounds and cultures. Manasi lives in India and Pooja is based in Singapore. I would guess that these countries have different reading and writing cultures, and as a result, people try to find their literary voices in different ways. Maybe you could educate us a little bit about that?
Again, I think that it would be presumptuous of me to, talk about Indian writing and reading at large. What I have, however, noticed is that I think people in India have always had a very, very strong literary culture in many regional languages, which, so every regional language has a very, very strong history of, I'm a Maharashtrian, I speak Marathi. So, I know that in my language there has been a centuries old culture of writing. We're not even talking about oral culture and everything, right? So I think it's very different if it comes to an urban cities in India, which is what my generally like book has been positioned in. I would say that it's diverse. Again, there are books which are in literary fiction. There are books which fall in popular fiction. There are books which are cookbooks. There are travelogues, there are dieting books, there are all sorts of things. I mean, so I would say that it's very difficult to pinpoint right now what exactly is the direction in which Indian people are reading. People, I think, are reading very, very different kinds of books. People are reading blogs. Obviously, people are reading a lot of fiction from abroad. Or, not fiction, just like, books from abroad. So I would say it's very difficult because India is such a diverse country to pinpoint in one position what they're doing.
Again, like I feel very uncomfortable talking for the whole of Singapore. But just to give you a bit of background, there's 4 official languages recognized in Singapore. So that's Mandarin, Malay, Tamil, and English. And our national language is Malay. So our national anthem is in Malay, but the language of use is English. So we have writing in all 4 languages. And the scenes don't really coincide as much as they should. And within the English writing scene, like, it's funny that we have so many poets. it is just more poets per square foot capita than anywhere else. We're saturated with poets. And I think like there's a lot of, because we're a very young nation, we just celebrated 50 years of independence. There's a lot of still trying to figure out what it is to be Singaporean. And also because it's changed so much in the last 50 years and the change has been so sudden and quick that we're still trying to catch up with what being Singaporean means. So that pervades a lot of our narratives, from very big political questions to very personal questions about what it means to belong as a Singaporean. How I personally found my voice, I think I'm still finding my voice. My voice changes, as I think it should, as you grow older and have different experiences. But I found poetry through just books and things, but performance poetry in particular through slams, poetry slams. So I went to one when I was in university, and I thought it was so incredibly powerful, the way reading a poem could translate it, you know? And like sometimes you read a poem on the page and you hear a poet read it and it's a completely different experience. And I was like, because I have an interest in theatre, I thought, oh, I could do that. And that's how I started. And I don't slam anymore, but I do think performance is so powerful in what it can do for the written word. So that influences a lot of how I write. Yeah.
That just goes to show that even though our countries are fairly close to each other, there can be so much variation in the way we do things. And despite how advances in communication and technology have been making places more connected. Speaking of technology, the internet has been a game changer in a lot of aspects of life, particularly in literature. Now, not only have thousands of webzines sprung up, but there are a lot more platforms for people interested in language, such as blogs and phenomena like self-publishing. At the same time, technology also has its drawbacks. An increase in the production of electronic gadgets and gizmos has led to more and more kids turning towards them and being pushed farther and farther away from the written word. Keeping that in mind, could you guys tell us whether finding and expressing your literary voice has become easier or more tricky in today's day and age?
I would say it's both. I mean, obviously, as technology moves forward, there would be various mediums. There would be various gadgets, yes, but there would also be various mediums, because each gadget has a sort of a medium of its own. You know, what works on mobile doesn't work on tablet, doesn't work on PC, and doesn't work on a smart TV, and things like that, right? So I think that's something which will always happen. I don't think it's happened now. I think it was always happening. Books were were not available to masses for a long time, and people rued the fact that, oh my God, like look at this. After printing became sort of, you know, possible. Oh my, I mean, you know, it's not limited to the elite class anymore. So I think that's like it has a history of. As far as internet is concerned, I think there is. I am a big fan of internet. I think it just does so many things for people who had no exposure, who had no means of connecting. Having said that, obviously one remembers that what is written, the information, like how information is not knowledge. Just because you're connected or just because you have like exposure to thousands of social media or any similar thing, does not necessarily mean that you have the kind of content to talk about. So I think, but that is something which would always be there. I don't see that, you know, there would always be idiots who think that because, you know, they have whatever 1 million followers that it's something great. And there would always be people who are doing meaningful work in various, and the blogs, which you are a blogger. I do have immense respect for, you know, online forums which give you exposure to literature, like how she said, like, you know, how else would I know what's happening, you know, in Singapore? Maybe it will take me some time to actually realize and make a choice from just random information. And but if I'm not someone who just likes to post it on my Facebook account to show that I'm a eclectic reader, I think it sort of depends on people, how you want to. You can use it, you can abuse it any way you want to, like everything else. Yeah.
I think that the internet has changed the way in which we read and the way in which we write. So it was fascinating for me when I was teaching teenagers. Oh, teenager demons. When I was teaching teenagers, and a lot of the time, like people would say, oh, you know, this is the Twitter generation. They can only read 140 characters. They have no concentration span. But actually, I think people like of that generation are processing information quicker than ever, and they're writing in a much more concise way. And so for example, Carol Ann Duffy, who's the current poet laureate of the UK, has said that SMS is the new form of poetry, which is true if you think about it. Like, think about an emoticon, right? You can use a smiley face emoticon to say like 100 different things. Like, are you late again? Smiley face, right? So, or like, oh, it's really nice meeting you today, smiley face. And then the smiley face is actually a symbol. And that's kind of poetry if you think about it. So I actually think like picking up on what you said, it's just the written word is changing and language use as we know it is changing, and we just need to catch up to that. And so I think as people, like I grew up on the cusp of the internet, like, you know, when I was 15 we had dial-up internet, which was really exciting. The modem. Yeah, so I grew up there. So I grew up without internet and then with internet. And I think as people who didn't grow up with internet from the get-go, instead of telling a generation that, oh, you need to read print books, or you need to, you know, be able to highlight passages and be able to, like, you know, I think it's just, or summarize them. I think it's more important for us to realize that the world doesn't work in that way, and that actually people are processing information very differently. Yeah. That's all. It's just a change. I don't think it's good or bad. I think it's just different. Yeah.
And it's going to happen no matter what.
Yeah.
I think we have only a little bit of time left. So, as a parting note, would you guys like to share a few pointers to the audience on how to find their voice?
Oh God, it sounds like a tough this thing. I think it's easy to say, you know, like a lot of times you hear, oh, just follow your passion, and I think it's the worst cheating thing people ever say to people, just follow your passion. It's the most cliched thing. I think if you are really committed to finding your voice, you will. A lot of people do in various ways. Those ways may not find their ways into Goa Lit Fest maybe, but you know, people do find voices. Again, taking up from what she said, is that because there is so much of diversity, it's great if people are finding voice in a blog, for example. It doesn't have to be a written, printed book. Self-publishing is a phenomenon, and most of India's bestsellers have been self-published because they've been rejected by the mainstream publishing houses. So that's a fact. So I think it's something which people who truly want to, like how she said, she said that it's a means of survival. For her, poetry is means of survival. So she would always look for those means of survival through words, and such people would always find their voice in one way or another. I would say.
And I find this very, like when people tell young writers, oh, you need to find your voice, like I find that really overrated, because what does that mean, you know? So I think, like for me as a young person writing, and we all started out imitating. Everybody starts out imitating their favorite writers, because that's your first exposure. So if you go back to the first poem or the first short story you've written, you're probably just cringing in horror because it's so obvious that it's an imitation. But that's okay, because that's how you have to start out. And for me, it's not so much about, it's almost as if like, if I find my voice, then I've arrived and then everything will be fine. But honestly, the way I wrote 5 years ago is not how I write now, and it probably will not be the way I write 5 years in the future. So to me, what's more important to tell writers who are starting out at any age is just, my guiding principles are be honest to who you are and the issues that matter to you and the things you need to say, or the things you feel haven't been said that you can say. And so tell the stories that you can tell that nobody else can. That's what's more important to me, rather than, you know, finding this ambiguous voice. Yeah.
So there we have it for this session. Does anyone have any questions for?
Yeah.
Any questions? Finding your voice?
I don't know if you have anything with you, but is there a small thing you can read so we can get a taste of your writing? Do you have your book with you?
I
Or
don't
like
have my book. It might be a little gory.
I think
So I'm a little worried.
I would be interested anyway, just to get a sense of your
Have your
writing.
book here?
I,
And Pooja as well, perhaps.
I'm just wondering what to.
Spoken word. You have yours.
With all these issues of censorship and all, I'm sure your parents might just whack me on my head if they come to know that. Okay. Give me 2 minutes. I'll just don't know.
Sure.
Yeah, because it is pretty much gory from the beginning.
Read the
So I
first
was-
page. Just read the first page.
We are planning to buy it, yes. Okay, very
Oh,
good.
Don't give us spoilers.
Yeah, exactly.
First page.
Just read the first page then, or whatever you wish.
Okay. It was on. You want to start? Let me find
Okay.
It's easier for you.
I think I'll read a poem that I wrote 10 years ago because this is a panel about finding your voice. So it's really hard for me to read this because it's like reading juvenilia, but I'm going to do it just in the spirit of reading something from my younger self. So this is a poem I wrote when I was really doing slams, and it was a poem about feeling really like a minority in Singapore. And so this one is called A Rant. I want to hear a poem about Singapore, about this multiracial island untouched by thin lines of segregation, too faint to see. A poem about why there are 4 races when I see at least 5 different shades of brown every time I walk down the street. One of the kids in my class said, most lawyers are Indians because Indians are articulate. And then 10 minutes later agreed he had never seen a mama shop run by a Chinese. Mama shops are little provision shops. Yeah. I want to hear a poem about why our national pledge says, regardless of race, language, or religion, but in primary 1, I was ushered into the Tamil class because I was Indian. It was determined that was my mother tongue. As a 6-year-old, I could not get them to believe I did not know this foreign language the teacher was rolling out between her teeth. Give me a poem about why we talk about integration and diversity, and then explain why when my parents came here in 1983, they could not find one decent Hindi movie on TV. I want to hear a poem about our education system and our premier institutions that churn out genius children who have never spent time trying to ride a bike downhill without brakes or read a book just for fun because they spend 18.9 hours a week on tuition. Explain how we are being trained to be a thinking nation. If our elite are the cream of the crop, why is it when I ask these gifted kids for an opinion in class, not one hand goes up? Why are there no poems telling us to think, 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 dream, dream, dream in crazy, unpredictable free verse, not in strict sonnets with rules or structure, harping on what should be like a broken record? I want to hear a poem about Singapore, a poem about confusion and the wheels of change, a poem about how our soul is a shopping center and our opinions are out of range. A poem about how alien poems are in this country, how our National Day songs tell us every creed and every race has its role and has its place. What is mine? I have lived here 24 out of the 25 years of my life and I do not identify. I haven't quite got my ground on my feet. I want to hear a poem about my country, you know, something that represents me.
Okay, so I'll just read a random list which is without spoiler or any sort of. The next morning was colder and pleasanter. Mukta jogged to Ferguson College, crossed the big ground behind, and reached the Ferguson Hill. She climbed it at a brisk pace and ran down, reaching Symbiosis College. She jogged back home, drank half a bottle of water, deep breathed for 10 minutes, and kickboxed for half an hour. She was dripping with sweat when she landed her last gig. She took a quick shower and ate one idli. She felt on top of the world. She called Chakradhar. As expected, he didn't pick up the phone. Chakradhar woke up depressed from his dream and stayed in bed for a long time. "Where's my life going?" he asked the ceiling fan. Increasingly, he didn't feel like getting up from his bed in the mornings. He felt as if he was filled with a vacuum so big and so incomprehensible that no work, friends, job satisfaction or thrills would fill it up. He got up, made some tea and lit a cigarette. He stood at his window with newspapers in his hands, staring at the hills outside and the lake. The area that was once filled with fields was unrecognizable now, with commercial and residential complexes springing up every day. What was once quite a village with only a few modern buildings had today become a busy suburb, full of traffic jams, water shortage and ugly shopping malls. Chakradhar and Meera had loved the flat the moment they had seen it. Pashan lake, hills, fields stretching far, large old trees. They could touch the gulmohar branches from their fourth floor flat. They could afford it too. The prices were very moderate back then, not anymore. He remembered vividly the evening they had got possession of the flat. Meera had bought a full basket of jasmine and had wound them all over the door, filling the entire flat with their sexy fragrance. Chakradhar had opened a bottle of scotch. They got drunk and made love on the dusty floor. They had sat up, cuddled in each other's arms, promising each other the best future ever. Future indeed. In less than 3 years, Meera was dead, leaving him desolate beyond imagination. Chakradhar read his newspapers. He looked for iron shirts, realized he had none, wore a squash t-shirt and an equally crumpled pullover. He drove to Navjeevan office, cursing mentally and verbally at the chaotic traffic. He parked his Enfield and came up to the third floor. He collided with Bapu as he was walking into the office. Bapu looked meaningfully at his watch and tapped it. The cursed meeting must be starting now. Chakradhar averted his eyes and walked in. His office was cluttered with newspapers, tapes, DVDs and hundreds of loose sheets. He pushed the litter away from his table and booted his laptop. His assistant Rajesh walked in with a huge smile on his face. "Happy New Year, Chakradhar." Chakradhar shook hands with his slightly foolish but lovable teammate. "Oh yes, the murder. I've been getting calls from everyone. And yes, Bapu wanted a lowdown on it," declared Rajesh in a tone of self-importance. Rajesh loved to talk to important people and according to Mukta was a show-off of the first order. "I've given him a lowdown." Chakradhar shrugged. "Do we start talking to Kumar's friends today? I've got some names and number." Yes, I think we should start, Chakradhar said. "Why don't you and Mukta start right away? I'll join you in about 2 hours. I have a meeting now," said Chakradhar. "Oh yes, with KPTN. I heard that they want to restructure the organization." Chakradhar looked at the 25-year-old boy quizzically. Rajesh knew everything and anything in the office. He was not very bright as a reporter, but his networking skills had kept Chakradhar up to date with office gossip. You sit with Mukta first and then the three of us will divide the people that need to be interviewed," said Chakradhar. You want to interview?" Rajesh quizzed. "Yes, and why not?" "Well, there is a team lunch for all the heads of departments at Renaissance after the meeting." Chakradhar smiled at him. "I would rather go and meet Kumar's friends and do my job. The network people do not need me to be there to feed them. Here are some notes on the case, go through them and think. We'll talk about it later." And it goes on.
So this piece, so I write kind of a bit of everything. So this is a poem. It's going to pale in comparison, but so I wrote it for my father on his birthday, and so it's called "To Dad with Love." In it, I tried to talk about what an important role he played in me getting my black belt. So, "Dear Father, I write to you with a song on my lips, a Cheshire cat grin on my face. It all happened so quick, so lightning bolt-esque. I've staggered ever since in a daze. I'm a black belt, Dad. I did it. I did. I'm so proud and triumphant and glad. But it never would have happened in a million years if you were not my dad. You pushed me harder than even myself. You were gentle but stubborn and stern. And thanks to your guidance, your loving support, I fought and I won and I learned that discipline and hard work and hours of toil are key if I want to succeed. And maybe sometimes I back answered you, your kind lessons I paid no heed. But I have to confess of my open ears that devoured every word that you said. And then at night, when I was all tucked in, I'd recite your lines in my head. They gave me the power I so longed for, the passion, the drive, the desire. So I thank you, Dad, with all my heart, the one who's forever pushing me higher. Love, Trusha."
Thanks. That's I must say, quite good, because I remember my first poem somewhere in the 7th or 8th standard Sunday is a day of rest when we must all do our best. We were sort of trapped in the rhythm and yeah, right. Ms. Mock perhaps would share how you found your creative voice.
I've always written poems. They were very cheesy. I mean, when I read them now, I cringe, like you were saying. I couldn't look back on anything I wrote before the age of 20, probably. Many years from where you are now. But I never considered writing as a profession until I crashed and burned with another career. And so when I finally got back to it, it seemed like a revelation, and suddenly life seemed so much easier, and time seemed so much easier to withstand if I were a writer, and so it seemed obvious after the fact.
Thanks. Desmond? Yeah?
Jose put me on the spot. The one poem that really made me realize that I could reinvent structure was Sestina, written by Noelle Cocott. She lives in New York, and she wrote the Brooklyn Sestina, 1971. She followed the rules, but she broke all the rules at the same time. And that's when it liberated me from tradition, from the idea of the sonnet as being this stock structure that I had to attend to. And that also liberated me as an individual, because my art is very much an extension of my dust in my being. And I started accepting myself a lot. So that was like 34. So that was good.
Thank you, Desmond. And thank you all for an excellent session.